Could we possibly see a blockbuster trade between the Leafs and the Sabres? Would a Mitch Marner for Jack Eichel trade make sense? We're going to discuss that as well as some other trade rumors concerning the Pittsburgh Penguins. Rod Brind'Amour is re-signed in Carolina. We have some other signings and award news as well. We'll jump into all the latest coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. Now, as I mentioned, we have a lot to cover here today. It's going to be one of those videos you're going to want to watch all the way through. There's a ton of information to be discussed. So let's dive right in and get started. Now, we have several smaller news updates here before we get into some of the bigger items today. For starters, Dallas Stars defenseman Stephen Johns is officially retired. This shouldn't come as a huge surprise. We've seen Johns battle a lot of different injuries as well as depression over the last few years. Concussions are certainly something that he's had an issue with, has kept him out of the lineup and out of many NHL games. Stephen Johns is only 29 years old. It's really kind of sad to see him have to retire so young, but he is already going on to his next endeavor, being a major fundraiser for mental health awareness as well. So certainly good on him for that, and we certainly wish him the best of luck here and everything that comes next for him moving forward. We did get the big news today that Rod Brind'Amour is indeed staying in Carolina. We've been reporting on this for the last few days based on information from NHL insiders that have been indicating that Brind'Amour appears to be staying put, and they did officially make the announcement here today, of course, on the 17th of June. The former number 17 himself, Rod Brind'Amour, announces the signing of a 3-year contract extension to remain with the Hurricanes. So that is absolutely huge news for them. He's been a terrific coach. He's a finalist for Coach of the Year this year. Done a great job. And it's just really hard to imagine him being anywhere else. And even though he stepped into the head coaching job without really having a lot of experience as a head coach, like he kind of stepped in as an assistant coach, but never really had that head coaching experience. But he just seems to be a natural for it. Has done a great job. Is a great leader, well connected with that team, and that was an absolutely major announcement by them today. That's great to see. So good to see everything get worked out to keep Brind'Amour with the Carolina Hurricanes. There's also word as well that Kraken appear to be getting closer to naming their first ever head coach, and many feel that Rick Tocchet just might be the leading contender, although until they make that announcement, it's not a done deal. But many feel that he has an inside edge, but there's certainly other coaches that they've been speaking to as well, and we'll have to wait to be seen here. But I believe GM Ron Francis had indicated before that he wanted to have his coach in place before the end of June. So I would say probably sometime in the next week or so we're likely to get an announcement. So it shouldn't be too much longer before we have that information as well. Now, we also found out today the finalists for the GM of the Year award, which is Marc Bergevin of the Montreal Canadiens, Bill Zito of the Florida Panthers, as well as New York Islanders general manager Lou Lamoriello. So all three of those guys certainly had pretty good years. I know leading into the end of the regular season, some were really starting to question the future of Marc Bergevin in Montreal. I know a lot of people thought he had a lot of pressure on him this year after the success in the bubble last year to produce and get this team into the playoffs and make some noise to really kind of reassure his job moving forward, and he's certainly done that. I know some of the moves he made were not looking good near the end of the regular season, like Eric Staal, for example. But this team has done great in the playoffs. They find themselves in the Final Four and the semifinals, tied one game apiece with the Vegas Golden Knights. So at this point, I think it's fair to say that Bergevin and Dominic Ducharme are both safe for sure. I fully suspect that Ducharme's interim tag also will be removed here once the season is over. I think he's had enough playoff success regardless of how well they do in the last little bit here. If they beat Vegas or not, or win the Stanley Cup or not, I don't think any of that's going to matter. Both these guys will certainly be sticking around. Hard to say who wins the GM of the Year award. I think all three had a great season. You might favor Bill Zito. I know some of the contracts he signed, they got great value out of some players there, which really allowed them to take some steps forward and have such a strong resurgence in Florida. So to me, they probably saw the most improvement, and that quite often helps people determine their votes here. So wouldn't be shocking if Zito ends up being the winner. We do have a few signings here today, including some NHL players heading back to Europe. Senators goalie Marcus Högberg, who we reported before when the Senators season came to an end that he was not going to be qualified as an RFA, is indeed heading back to Sweden to play in the SHL. Of course, Högberg had an opportunity to be a backup goalie for a good chunk of last year in Ottawa. Looked like he might be trending towards being a regular NHL goaltender, but this year did not go well at all. Took some major steps back, and given the depth in the organization organization between the youngsters and Gustafsson and Decord and other guys like Sogard and Mandely's already under contract. And then, of course, they have Matt Murray under a longer-term deal. It just didn't make sense to keep him with the organization. So in a surprising move, though, he's going back to Sweden on a 4-year deal. I'm not completely shocked he's going to play in the SHL. I'm just so surprised that he will not be making another attempt at the NHL, at least until that contract expires. So it's surprising, but it might be what's best for him moving forward. And longtime NHL veteran center iceman Carl Soderberg, who ended up playing with the Avalanche after being reacquired at the NHL trade deadline, is indeed heading to play in Europe as well, except he signed a 2-year contract in Malmo in the SHL as well. So obviously I would assume that Soderberg's career likely will wrap up over there, given the fact that he's a little bit older. We also saw the Washington Capitals announce today that they've re-signed Garrett Pilon. He gets a 2-year deal, and in year 2, it's a one-way contract. So this coming season, he could still possibly play in the minors on a 2-way deal, but the year after, he is guaranteed NHL money and will be on a one-way contract with the Capitals. The Columbus Blue Jackets also announced today that they've re-signed Kevin Stellan to a 1-year contract as well, making it just over $1 million for the coming season. Now, before we jump into the remainder of the trade rumors in this video, I do just want to take a moment here and acknowledge another channel sponsor that we've added to the mix, Ekster. Now, of course, we're still working with Manscaped as well, but Ekster's another great brand coming on board here with Top Shelf Hockey that has some great products for you to consider. So check out what they have to offer. Top Shelf Hockey is proud to be sponsored by Ekster. Forbes calls Ekster the most successful smart wallet brand in the world. They certainly have high quality products, high grade leather. You can put all your cards in your wallet with RFID protection, and you can track it worldwide. That's the best part. You don't have to worry about losing your wallet and not being able to track it down. They have a great selection of products to choose from here, a variety of colors and styles, something to surely help for everyone. As you can see in the demonstration here for the product I have, this is a beautiful packaging, high quality. When you open it up, you get a high quality wallet with lots of slots for your cards. You have yourself a money clip if you want to carry cash on you here as well. And certainly, as you can see, the quality is outstanding. And here you can see the switch where you can help open up your cards. You just one little click and boom, everything fans out right in front of you. Easy to access. Your cards are protected. And here's the back where you have yet another slot. A terrific overall product, and I can't recommend these enough. Ekster ships worldwide, and you can check out the link down below in the description as well as the pinned comment to buy yours today. So thanks very much for taking the time to watch that promotional video. I greatly appreciate it. Now diving into the rest of today's content. First up, I just want to take a quick look at the Pittsburgh Penguins, and then we're going to analyze some situations here between the Sabres and the possibility of doing a deal with the Leafs. Now with the Penguins organization, they're certainly a team that's in dire need of some cap space. They're already technically over the salary cap for next season. Obviously, many of these teams did not project having a flat cap in the pandemic and all the revenue losses and everything we've been through here, and that we're going to continue to see affect the NHL for the next several years. Now, the Penguins, like I said, they had a decent run here this past year. They won their division, but unfortunately got beat out of the playoffs early, and there's certainly going to be some hard decisions for GM Ron Hextall and President of Hockey Operations Brian Burke. They've really yet to make a significant change to this roster to really leave their mark on the team, although some of the things they did do ahead of the deadline worked out quite well, especially acquiring Jeff Carter from the Los Angeles Kings. But obviously he still has term in his contract, so adding him into the mix, as much it wasn't too much of an impact in the cap situation for the current season that just finished. Obviously going into next year, that does impact things moving forward, having another middle of the road contract on the book. So they do need space, and they need it in the worst way. They have some other expiring deals of players that need to be re-signed, and obviously they don't really have much of an ability to do that right now. Now, fortunately, you can go over the salary cap by upwards of 10% in the offseason. They do have a buffer in that regard, so it's not a major concern. They know they're going to lose a player in the expansion draft. It's just a matter of who they end up losing. That's still to be determined, of course, and there's lots of other areas in the team that I do expect the management team to address here. But a couple of key names that are coming up in the rumor mill that could be traded specifically for the purpose of shedding some salary and creating some space would be defenseman Marcus Pettersson and forward Jason Zucker. Now, Pettersson's name has been out there for some time. He's a player that I think when they signed that contract and gave him some term, that things were looking really solid, and he seems to have regressed in his play. And they found some other defensemen to come into the mix here since, including like Mike Matheson and Cody Ceci, who I think is fair to say, especially Ceci, like had a pretty decent year. Like compared to where he's played the last few years in Toronto and Ottawa, he just seemed to do better, find a better home, had a better role, and it was just better suited for how they run their defense there. So clearly they need some money, and Pettersson seems to be the odd man out here on the blue line. Of course, they still have Dumoulin, Letang as well. Marino's in the mix there. So Pettersson, like I said, it seems to be the contract that's most likely to get dealt, and I do think there'll be some interest. It's not a huge contract, but it does have some term, so I'm not sure if he'll be a player of interest to the Kraken or not, because he likely would be exposed if indeed he's still on the roster when we reach expansion draft time. And in the case of Jason Zucker, well, he's, to be honest, this hasn't quite lived up to his contract at this point. So when you look around the roster and decide who would be most preferable to move, of course, guys like Crosby and Malkin aren't going anywhere. They gave up a lot to get Kasperi Kapanen last year, and I think he was a decent fit after he joined the team last year. Brian Russ has been there quite a while, pretty steady. Jeff Carter fit in quite nicely. So when you look at the other guys that normally play top 6 or top 9, Zucker's making over $5 million a year. And to me, after only putting up 18 points this past season, I think there's a decent chance they will try to shed themselves of that contract if it's remotely possible. Now, again, he could be another candidate that maybe they talk to Seattle about taking, or perhaps they figure out a trade ahead of time. But like I said, they need cap space in the worst way, and one or both of these players are very, very likely to find themselves on the move here ahead of next season. Now, lastly, like I said, I want to talk about Jack Eichel and some teams that could be in the mix, including the possibility of the Toronto Maple Leafs. Now, I'll warn you, I think a deal with the Leafs are probably very unlikely to happen, but there's a recent article on Sportsnet that kind of indicates how it could work and how the Leafs could actually win a Marner trade, which would be very tough to do. Anytime you're trading a star quality player, it's certainly no easy task to pull out ahead and consider yourself the victorious team in the trade. Now, of course, the Eichel talks, though, are apparently intensifying, as we've been talking about and reporting on here over the last few days. There's a lot of words from various NHL sources indicating that there's a lot of real serious conversations taking place, and it is looking more and more likely that Eichel will indeed be moved either at or before the 21 NHL draft. Now, clearly, the Sabres are targeting getting some other high picks in return. They seem to really favor this 2021 NHL draft more than many other teams around the league, and would be quite content to grab 1 or 2 more high picks in this draft. They're already picking first overall. They actually had a little bit of luck in the draft lottery. Of course, they did have the best odds, but they actually got the pick, which is something you don't often see, but it did work out in their favor. But not only do they have Eichel, but they also have Sam Reinhart and Rasmus Ristolainen as trade bait here as well. And there's a real good chance that all three of them will find themselves in a new home next year. And there could be more than one of these first round picks that are, that might be up for grabs, wind up with the Sabres before all is said and done. And they could have 2, maybe 3 picks inside of the top 10 or the top 15, which would really allow them to grab some of the top talent in this draft and maybe accelerate a rebuild. At least it's a good possibility. And that's what they're hoping for. It seems to be their strategy at this point. Now, we've talked a bit about the Kings being out on Eichel. We had reports from John Hoven, covers the team closely, by the way, in LA, and is a great source, saying that his sources with the Kings are indicating that they're out on Eichel. But we keep hearing others, including Elliot Friedman and some other very credible sources as well, indicate the fact that they have a lot of people telling them that they feel that the Kings are lying about being out on Eichel, and it might be more of a negotiation tactic, and that they really are still seriously interested, which would not be shocking. Sometimes we've heard teams kind of leak to the media that they're out on certain players, and they just kind of want to make sure that they have, better negotiating tactics and try to sneak in there with the best offer. And if other teams feel like they have an inside edge. They may not be offering as good a deal as they possibly could to try to make it happen. And just a way, like I said, to get some leverage in there. Same goes for the New York Rangers. I've seen some Rangers reporters indicating that they've had word from Ranger sources that they're not all that crazy about an Eichel trade and that things have calmed down in their interest in that regard. But again, many others are saying the contrary, that they're still very much interested and seriously in the mix. Now, I think it's fair to say some of the other teams that would be high contenders that we've talked about before include the Minnesota Wild as well as the Anaheim Ducks. Now, in the case of the Anaheim Ducks, we've heard insiders like Friedman mention before that, especially in recent trade discussions, they were unwilling to part with defenseman Jamie Drysdale or prospect center iceman Trevor Zegras, who are high-end prospects and should have real solid NHL careers. For example, the Ducks were heavily involved in the Pierre-Luc Dubois trade talks when he was leaving Columbus, and they were unwilling to include either of those players in any kind of a trade, which is why they ended up doing a deal with Winnipeg for Patrick Laine instead. So if they were unwilling to do that for Dubois, are they still unwilling to do that for a guy like Eichel? You have to wonder what kind of package the Ducks can put together here. Of course, they have a high first-round pick in 2021. That would have to be in there. You'd have to think another player, maybe like a Max Comtois or a young player off their roster would be included, and maybe some other prospects like a Jacob Perreault, Benoit Olivier Groulx, or others that may not be Drysdale or Zegras would be likely what's offered up. And that may not be the best possible deal for the Buffalo Sabres. So it's difficult to say if the Ducks do not want to include either of those prospects, and I can understand why they wouldn't, that they may not stand as strong of a chance as some people might think. This article from Sportsnet and Luke Fox talks about the Toronto Maple Leafs and how it would actually make sense for them. And after going through this scenario and looking at it, I do tend to agree that it could work and it could benefit both teams, and it could very well make sense for the Leafs. Now, here is some of the rationale as to why. For starters, Marner's contract is a little bit higher than Eichel. So I'm not suggesting this is a complete one-for-one trade. There could be other pieces involved. But just the two main pieces, Marner and Eichel, from the Leafs standpoint, you're getting a centerman instead of a winger. And they clearly showed in the playoffs that they could use some more depth at center, as much as they have guys like John Tavares and Austin Matthews in the mix here. Tavares goes down and their center depth was suddenly exposed. Kerfoot was pretty good. He played a decent two-way role, but still, he's not at the level to be a top six center, in my opinion. He's more of a number three. So obviously, if you're going to be a real cup contender, we know having real solid depth down the middle is extremely important in most cases, with probably Vegas being the exception to that rule. They seem to have a lot more wing depth and higher end talent on the wings than they do down the middle here, but still, they're a bit of an enigma in that sense, because normally center icemen are extremely more vital to your long-term success in getting to the playoffs and getting to a Stanley Cup. In the case of the Maple Leafs, if they trade Marner for Eichel, for one, they get a little bit of cap space back, so that might help them with other areas, so they save a little bit of money. If you look at the contract here, Mitch Marner's been paid out a boatload of that money already. He's very front-loaded. So the Sabres would actually save some real hard cash. So the Sabres ownership don't have to pay out as much cash, which is a benefit to them. Leafs save a little bit of salary cap space, which is a benefit to them. To bring in Jack Eichel as your center iceman, you move John Tavares to the wing is what you do, obviously, because you don't want to have John Tavares or Jack Eichel being your number three center iceman. That does not make sense for the kind of money that either of them would be making. But you take away Marner off the wing, obviously. Instead of going out to get another elite winger, you move Tavares to the wing. I think Tavares is at a stage of his career. He's a little bit older, slowing down a little bit. Still a great player, but not as quick as he used to be. Really, in being the quickest was never his strongest suit in the first place. He's still a great playmaker, can still score and all that. Like, he's still really, really good, don't get me wrong. But it might be beneficial to have John Tavares on the wing. I mean, if you have a winger like that who can be good on faceoffs and knows the center ice position well, that's only going to benefit him anyways, and he can play center in a pinch if there's any injuries or other lineup deficiencies that need to be fed there. So clearly, it could be a benefit that way. You still have guys like Austin Matthews. You still have William Nylander. You have Jack Eichel, John Tavares. You still have really a solid big four. But the big four is just a little bit less expensive and giving a little bit more of a different dynamic in there. Now, whether or not Zach Hyman stays is still to be seen. He may not be in the mix. You might have to mix in some other younger talent on cheaper contracts, perhaps. Maybe Nick Robertson gets a shot up there. I'm not sure, because there's certainly some other areas of this team that needs attention this year, and like I mentioned, the possibility of a Morgan Rielly trade, that wouldn't be shocking either. They could possibly save some money in that regard. But it goes to show that if the Leafs really wanted to consider trading one of their big four, many feel that if they ever do that, Marner's the most likely to go. And that's a way that they could actually win a Marner trade to get more deep down the middle and actually save a little bit of money in the process. I'm not saying that's the greatest idea ever and that they should 100% do it. But if I'm Kyle Dubas and I'm talking to the Sabres, and if we want to actually have conversations, I think it's at least something that they should consider. I don't know that they do it, but it's not that ridiculous of an idea. Like, it's something that they really should think long and hard about. If you look at a lot of the teams that have won cups recently, that center depth has proven to be extremely important. And I know that the Leafs, as you could say, they didn't live up to expectations in the playoffs. But that John Tavares injury in the very first game early on of the playoffs like that had a major impact on this team. It shook them mentally, and it took away one of their major weapons out of the mix. So maybe a different dynamic of those weapons would be better suited. So I'm not completely sold on the idea, but I do think it makes some sense, has some legs, and should at least be considered and discussed. So let me know what your thoughts are. Does a Marner for Eichel trade make sense to you? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. Would it be 1-for-1? What else would be involved? Give me your mock trades. I want to hear what you have to think in the comment section down below. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the latest news on all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.